caught my stepson playing with his. So I assisted him. How could I have anticipated that moment would transform my life entirely? It was merely a typical day, until I stepped into that room. As I caught sight of the door ajar, a subtle change stirred within me in an instant. I might have chosen to retreat, to overlook it. However, I refrained, for in that instant of clarity, I understood that nothing would ever return to its former state. Indeed, I bear the responsibility, as I was the initiator, and the one who failed to bring it to a halt. George was at his desk, immersed in his tasks. The house lay in stillness, yet I could discern soft sounds drifting down from the upper floor. Elliot found himself in his room. Initially, I didn't give it much thought. Another fleeting moment of a young man adrift in his own universe. Perhaps he would enjoy a coffee. A brief chat could be enjoyable. As I ascended the stairs, I pondered the source of the sounds echoing around me. As I approached his room, I observed that the door was slightly open. I inhaled deeply, ready to call out to him. But then my gaze fell upon Elliot. He sat on his bed, laptop resting on his lap, the bright screen illuminating his face with a soft glow. His hands were in motion, and initially, I believed he was merely observing something thrilling. Perhaps a thrilling action film. Yet, as I shifted my position, taking another step, a wave of cold dread washed over me, draining the color from my cheeks. That was the moment I understood precisely what Elliot was up to. The reflection on the screen captured my gaze, and a chill swept through me. I didn't see this coming. I didn't want to witness this. Elliot hurriedly attempted to regain his composure, anxiously reducing the volume on his laptop. However, the moment had passed. The moment had already transpired. As our gazes locked, his complexion flushed a vivid crimson, the embarrassment in his eyes unmistakable. I apologize, he faltered, averting his gaze. I felt immobilized, as if time had stopped around me. Well, the door. I began, yet I found myself utterly lost in the words I was attempting to convey. A peculiar warmth enveloped me. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me, yet my thoughts were a whirlwind, elusive and just out of reach. I hurriedly exited the room, my heart racing in my chest. I pressed my hands to my face, attempting to calm my breath. What on earth was that? I murmured softly to myself. What had I just done? Why had I been so negligent? However, was I the sole one to blame in this situation? Enough, Darlene, I reminded myself firmly. Yet the turmoil within me was ignited by more than merely what I had witnessed. Elliot had reached the age of 23. He had outgrown his childhood. However, I was also 47, a woman who had faced her fair share of shame throughout life. I found myself in an unfamiliar situation, yet I was acutely aware of the sensation of shame. I remained motionless in the hallway, my heart pounding fiercely. I ran my fingers through my hair, attempting to regain my composure. As Elliot stood at the doorway, he fiddled with the collar of his shirt, cleared his throat, and averted his gaze. Darlene. I apologize. I believed I had shut the door, he remarked, his tone wavering yet earnest. I swiftly turned my gaze, shaking my head in response. No. In fact, I ought to be the one expressing my apologies. I ought to have knocked before entering, I said quickly, unsure of what else to express. Quietude. Yet this silence was unlike any other. We had resided in the same house for years. Yet this was the first occasion we had ever gazed at one another in this manner. The initial moment brought forth a unique kind of tension between us. I should head downstairs and start preparing something for dinner, I said, swiftly turning toward the stairs. My voice quivered, yet I endeavored to maintain my composure. Elliot remained silent. He merely tracked me with his gaze, as though he were attempting to assemble something in his thoughts. Before the significant events unfolded between Elliot and me. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, enable notifications, and stay tuned to this story until the very end. I assure you, everything is about to become truly thrilling. Up until that evening, we remained silent with one another. No texts, no eye contact, not even small talk. Yet, in that silence, there was a whisper that everything would change forever. During dinner, we occupied the same table, yet our eyes remained averted from one another. The sole sound was the gentle clinking of silverware against our plates. We had to have a conversation. To alleviate the strain, it was something we both understood. But how? The night slipped away, followed by the dawn of a new day, and then another came to follow. All appeared to be as it should. Yet beneath the surface, nothing was as it seemed. The quiet between us only intensified the unseen tension that lingered in the air. Then, one afternoon, Elliot took a seat beside me. I noticed the uncertainty in his gaze, yet it was evident he desired to make amends. "Darlene, regarding our conversation the other day, I feel quite ashamed. I regret that circumstances have unfolded like this. Please, I don't want this to ruin things between us," he said, his voice trembling yet earnest. I inhaled deeply. No matter how peculiar and unforeseen this situation was, I had to ensure he felt comfortable. I smiled, gave a slight shrug, and replied, "Oh, Elliot, trust me. I've experienced my fair share of embarrassing moments throughout the years." Subsequently, I recounted several of those instances to him. His smile softened a bit, and he nodded, his embarrassment diminishing slightly. In that instant, it felt as though the strain between us had dissipated. Yet, beneath the surface, I was aware. Nothing had genuinely transpired. Despite the apparent improvements, this conversation had utterly wiped away the limits that separate us. And I could sense it, the moment was on the brink of escalating to something far greater. Elliot released a soft laugh, his eyes drifting down to the table. "I suppose we're even now," he said softly. I furrowed my brow and shifted my gaze toward him. What does that imply?" I inquired, a sense of wonder tinging my tone. For a brief moment, his expression changed, as if he had just come to the realization that he had uttered something irreversible. He rubbed the back of his neck, pausing for a moment. Yet he had already begun. And now he found himself compelled to press on. He inhaled deeply, then averted his gaze as he whispered, "I've seen you. The identical manner. You simply weren't aware of it." It felt as though a surge of energy had coursed through my entire being. I paused for a moment. "What is happening?" I whispered, as the weight of his words pressed down on me. Elliot's face was flushed. Yet he persisted. "I never shared this with you, as I felt too ashamed." Yet it remained etched in my memory. In truth, it was my own little secret. A thought that lingered in my mind. My heart raced uncontrollably. A peculiar warmth enveloped me, an unfamiliar feeling that signaled a shift had occurred. Elliot's words transcended mere confession, they obliterated every boundary that existed between us. I gazed at him. He was gazing at me as well. At this point, it was clear to us that this was no ordinary exchange. The atmosphere in the room had become dense, and everything had transformed. From that day forward, everything transformed. A distance had always existed between us in the past. The unseen divide that separated us. However, at this moment, it seemed as though that boundary had entirely disappeared. Unbeknownst to me, I found myself dedicating significantly more time to Elliot. Minor instances, apparently trivial exchanges. However, in truth, each instance merely intensified the friction between us. We even sat down and enjoyed movies together. In the past, we maintained a certain distance, but now, an invisible force drew us together. It was an unspoken understanding between us. A feeling we both shared yet never brought to light. At times, when Elliot rested his arm on the couch, when my hand lightly grazed his leg, or when our laughter mingled in the air, an unfamiliar sensation stirred within me. Yet, I made an effort to push it from my mind. On a restless night, sleep eluded me. I found myself restless, unable to settle in bed. Yet, the turmoil within me refused to grant me peace. Only a single thought occupied my mind. Elliot. This couldn't continue. I had to establish a limit. If he had feelings for me, I needed to express it clearly and put an end to it. With that thought in mind, I rose from my bed. My heart raced uncontrollably. Yet my feet had already led me to Elliot's room. The door stood ajar, a sliver of dim light spilling into the room, casting a soft glow within. Upon entering, I caught sight of him. He was in a deep slumber. At that moment, my gaze was elsewhere. They were focused on something entirely different. Something large. My breath was momentarily suspended. My body froze for a moment. Seeing him like that ignited a tempest within me. I ought not to have witnessed it. I ought to have turned around right away. However, I chose not to. I lingered for a moment, attempting to grasp the emotions swirling within me. Then, I swiftly returned. There was an undeniable force within me that I couldn't stifle, yet I had to push it aside. I returned to my room. Lay down, but everything felt different now. That night, I was blissfully unaware of the complexities that lay ahead. No matter what I tried, I found myself unable to resist the deepening bond with Elliot. As time went on, the lines became increasingly indistinct. The attraction between us only intensified. I was completely unaware of how much things had escalated. Yet the undeniable truth was that retreating was becoming an unthinkable option. And then Elliot arrived home just like that. He was intoxicated. The clatter from the door, the items he toppled, the cacophony could have stirred George from his slumber. Yet, I understood the struggle George faced each morning to rise from his slumber. I swiftly exited my room and made my way to Elliot. I barely had a moment to adjust my clothes before I found myself standing right next to him. Elliot's gaze drifted, a subtle smile lingering on his lips. "Darlene, are you truly here?" He spoke softly. His words were slurred from the alcohol, yet they carried a genuine sincerity. I inhaled deeply and seized his arm. "Elliot, let's go. You cannot ascend the stairs in this manner. We must maintain silence." Yet, Elliot's gaze was fixed firmly on my face. He smiled gently, his eyes gradually moving across me. "You truly possess a remarkable beauty. Have you always been like this? Or did I simply overlook it?" I paused for a moment but then swiftly regained my composure. "Elliot, that's sufficient. Step into the kitchen, and I'll brew you a fresh cup of coffee." I gently guided him to the kitchen. I was attempting to bring him back to reality, yet the intensity of Elliot's gaze and his words were causing something within me to come undone as well. Elliot settled into the chair as I busied myself with the coffee, but in an unexpected moment, the cup slipped from his grasp and cascaded onto the counter. "Ah, Elliot, you must exercise more caution," I murmured, hastily attempting to tidy up the chaos. Yet, Elliot merely offered a gentle smile. "Have you always been this kind?" I quickly tidied up the kitchen. We could no longer remain here. George lay upstairs in slumber, yet with Elliot in such a condition, he knew he must keep the noise to a minimum. "Okay, let's head upstairs. But be quiet," I cautioned, wrapping my arm around his and steering him toward the stairs. Upon entering his room, his movements appeared increasingly unsteady. He had to switch his clothes. Yet he felt too disoriented to manage it by himself. Initially, I felt the urge to retreat, but upon witnessing his struggle to remove his shirt, I found myself compelled to assist him. As my fingers brushed against the buttons of his shirt, Elliot's breathing became more measured. In that instant, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension between us. The quiet only heightened the intensity. I was fully aware of my actions, yet paradoxically, I felt completely lost. Elliot was observing me with a new perspective. And this was one of those moments, one of the moments we could never reclaim. Elliot paused as he changed his clothes. He let his hands drop to his sides and fixed his gaze on me. It was at that moment that I became aware of my accelerated breathing. The silence enveloped the room, the air thick and oppressive, each breath a struggle against the weight of stillness. "I'm not playing this game anymore, Darlene," he said, his voice initially soft but brimming with conviction. I gazed at him, unblinking. My heart raced with intensity. What was Elliot attempting to convey? "Are you?" he added, his voice taking on a deeper tone. We both noticed each other once, and that's all there is. Do you really not consider it at all? I understand it lingers in your thoughts just before you drift off. A chill coursed through my body, prompting me to take a hesitant step back, yet my feet seemed anchored to the ground. "Elliot. This isn't right," I said, though my voice quivered with uncertainty. Elliot offered a subtle smile, though it lacked innocence. We reached the moment of determining what's right quite some time ago. "Darlene. Cease deceiving yourself." Then he advanced a step. And yet another. He was so near now that I could sense his breath on my skin. He reached up, his fingers gliding softly across my cheek. I tried to turn my gaze, yet it held me captive. For I understood, beneath the surface, that he held the truth. And then Elliot's lips brushed against mine. Every moment of quiet. Every ounce of pressure. In that moment lay the key to all answers. The thoughts reverberating in my mind abruptly hushed. Every uncertainty dissolving into soft murmurs. Because I hadn't stood my ground against Elliot. And the reality was, I had never desired to. My hands shook, yet I remained steadfast. Upon witnessing the fierce resolve in Elliot's gaze, I understood there was nothing remaining to conceal. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the moment, and gradually let the straps of my attire slip down my shoulders. "You are correct, Elliot," I murmured, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. "It's time to stop this charade." As I closed the distance between us entirely, I reclined on the bed. My heart raced within my chest. However, retreating was no longer a possibility. Elliot gradually leaned closer to me. He gazed into my eyes for a brief moment. Then, a smile appeared. "Do not fear." He spoke, his tone gentle and comforting. "All is as it should be." I turned my gaze aside, a chill coursing through me. Though I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge it, I was acutely aware of how long I had been anticipating this moment. Yet, I found myself unable to hold back the words that tumbled from my lips. "Elliot, I feel a bit frightened," I admitted, my breath coming in fits. "Due to several significant factors." "Elliot. I'm feeling a bit frightened," I admitted, my breath coming in fits. "Due to several significant factors." Elliot smiled and brushed aside my words, as though he found them appealing. Perhaps it was due to his inebriation. Elliot leaned in softly, whispering to me, "George mustn't wake up." I understood his meaning, silence was necessary. I am uncertain about how to proceed. I experienced an overwhelming sensation within me, compelling me to pause. I refrained from creating a loud noise. Elliot glanced my way and remarked something along the lines of, "I know. Darlene. All is wonderful, and so are you." What was he aware of? It seems he had an inkling and truly comprehended my feelings. I found myself unable to resist, and I shut my eyes. I clutched the sheets firmly, my hands gripping tightly as my body shook and convulsed. I pressed my hands against my mouth to stifle any noise that might escape. Elliot was in such a state of inebriation that he was indifferent to everything around him. Indeed, this was impacting me significantly. The thrill of the occasion intertwined with all other elements. And the captivating sensation of something monumental. Elliot was inebriated, fatigued, and gasping for air. I said, "Elliot, you're looking quite flushed, and we need to move quickly." Elliot replied, "All right." He replied, "All right." Yet, he continued down the same path. And increasingly, and increasingly, and increasingly. I experienced another contraction, and at that moment, nothing else mattered to me. I had lost touch with who I truly was. I shut my eyes and whispered, "Whatever you desire, Elliot. Anything you desire." Elliot must have enjoyed it, as he allowed himself to relax. He released entirely. That was excessive. The intensity within me was overwhelming. I swiftly placed Elliot in his bed and tucked him in snugly. Then I secured his bedroom door. I sought a serene shower experience to unwind fully. I was completely in the dark about what was about to unfold. What just occurred? I contemplated it in the shower, yet simultaneously, a sense of nervousness and unease washed over me. And yet, by the time I stepped out, my mind felt more lucid. Strangely, I found myself feeling a sense of calm. I found it impossible to feel any anger towards myself. My body felt as relaxed as my mind. I dressed quietly, made my way to the bed, and fell asleep as though nothing had transpired. Yet, the reality is that this was merely a fleeting moment of exhilaration. A surge of impulsive longing. However, nothing was. It's never that straightforward. And this? This was not going to remain straightforward either. It didn't end here. It was impossible. Greater events unfolded. More powerful experiences. Ultimately, George was destined to discover the truth. All things. The tale is far from finished. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you won't miss out on what unfolds. Following. Enable notifications and share your thoughts in the comments. It keeps you ahead of the game for these narratives. Your encouragement is invaluable. And if you've reached this point, I appreciate your attention.